Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm so excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Michelle Eichert and Heidi Stevens. Thanks for attending. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 175 videos of past events archived on our website and our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now for introductions. Michelle Eichert is a speaker, author, and educator who helps kids, parents, and teachers navigate the complicated social world of early adolescence. Her latest book, 14 Talks by Age 14, guides readers through the essential conversations parents need to have with their kids before they start high school. She is currently writing her third book, The 10 Failures That Make Your Child a Success. And I bet we can come get her when that gets released. Ms. Eichert is a CNN parenting writer and a member of the NBC Today Show parenting team. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, Time Magazine, and People Magazine. Her conversation partner, Heidi Stevens, is the creative director for Parent Nation, a new initiative at the University of Chicago's TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health. Parent Nation works to build a society that ensures all parents have the information, resources, and supports they need to optimally raise their children. Prior to joining Parent Nation, Ms. Stevens worked at the Chicago Tribune for 23 years, where she wrote a daily column called Balancing Act. She maintains a nationally syndicated column once a week, and we're proud to have welcomed Heidi as a new board member to FAN this past September. And now, let's welcome Michelle Eichert and Heidi Stevens.
Thank you, Lonnie. I didn't know if I could cheer out loud or if I was still muted, but cheer out loud for being a FAN board member. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Heidi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here with you.
Oh my gosh, this is like a dream come true. And thank you to everyone who joined us. I think we've got a pretty robust crowd out there. I'm going to jump right in because we have so incredibly much to cover tonight. So I'm going to start with one of the most useful pieces of advice that you ever offered me. And this was when we were talking back about your first book, Middle School Makeover, was that as our kids get older, we actually get more time and more do-overs. And so like when we're raising babies and toddlers, so much of our parenting has to be immediate, right? In the moment, like don't put that in your mouth, don't run in the street. But as they get older, you can kind of take your time with coming up with the right advice. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to come up with the right advice. You can even say to them, you've coached me, you can even say like, I'm not really sure how to respond to that. I'm going to get back to you in a few hours after I've had time to think. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that sets the stage nicely for so much of what 14 Talks by Age 14 is about.
Sure. So you have a great memory that you're pulling up from a few years ago. So thank you for remembering that. So you're right. Time is on your side when you have adolescence. It doesn't feel that way. Things feel as urgent as ever. And I will say that I think it's not so much that kids are running out into the street or ingesting things that you don't want them to ingest, but they've gotten smart enough not to do it in front of you. So you don't have to like quick and snatch them back like you used to when they were little. And when they are coming to you for advice, or when you sense that they are in a space where they would benefit from some of your wisdom, then you do have some time to really think about things and to pause and to respond to them. Now, the problem that this creates, I think, is that it makes parents feel like they then need to be sort of clairvoyant and be able to predict what kinds of situations their kids might find themselves in and anticipate what that is, and then have the answer and coach them preemptively against any number of things. So as kids enter early adolescence, the world really opens up and they are exposed to a lot more possibility and a lot more danger, and it can feel scary to parent a kid through that. what I don't want any parent to feel is that they need to be able to sense ahead of time what could possibly go wrong and talk about all of those things. So the book really was written to give parents a strategy to talk, and not so much to say, here's exactly what you can say. There are, of course, scripts in there. But what I wanted was to coach parents at a time of life when kids are starting to pull away and shut down communication, for parents to learn how to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Well, and it felt to me and feels to me like permission not to have that script at the top of your mind, right? That if they present you with a question or a situation, or you stumble upon them in a certain situation, you can actually say, like, I don't know what to say in this moment. I'm going to get back to you, because they're not a toddler who's about to put their finger in a socket, right? Or run into traffic. You actually have a little bit more breathing room, and even maybe room for error, because you can come back and correct yourself, or open the conversation back up.
You totally can. And I think that when you fumble, it does become a really good opportunity to say, hey, I want to revisit this because I didn't love what I said. It didn't come out the way I wanted it to. Or now that I've had some time to think about it, I'm thinking about it differently. Your kids can really process that, once they're out of that danger, quick response mode of life. So I think that is exactly right. You've got time. And not only do you have time, but when you say something like, I need to think about that, you're really modeling how to slow down to a person who is at a phase of life that is really impulsive. So I think it's good for you, and it's good for them to see that too.
Yeah, the modeling. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me why you picked the age 14.
Yeah, so as you know, I love early adolescence. I've been steeped in middle school for almost 20 years now. So I started this work when my kids were 2 and 4, and they're 19 and 21 now. And I love it. I think it's a really exciting time of life. It's a tumultuous time of life. I call this time the middle school construction project, because it's when kids are building the things that they need to become adults. So they're starting to build an adult body and an adult brain and an adult sense of self and identity. I find that fascinating. I wanted 14 to me is kind of the beginning of, well, I'd say in the States, it's usually when people are starting high school. Or in their freshman year of high school. So to me, that feels like the bump up from middle school. You're entering that second stage of adolescence. And I wanted these conversations to happen early and often, and be really short, and be habit building, so that by the time your kid is in high school and the world's gotten even bigger, and there are even more opportunities and temptations and risk that they're exposed to, and they might be getting keys to a car or be spending more time away from home, that you could develop some really good conversational habits before they're kind of 1 foot out the door.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. How do you think the pandemic is affecting that? I mean, kids are missing or delaying so many milestones and rituals and routines that used to just kind of happen like clockwork, right, at various stages. And like, this is a super small kind of mundane example, but my daughter's 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip, right, which is like a, rite of passage, is happening at the end of 10th grade because COVID canceled it for the last 2 years. So is 14 the same in 2021 or 2022 as 14 was in 2018 or 2019?
That's the $1 million question, right? That's the thing everyone wants to know is, how is the pandemic affecting these kids, and especially in the long term? I mean, we know it's stressing everybody out and it's causing anxiety, and in some cases it's not. In some cases, kids are like, "Oh, I'm really loving this, being home and the stability that provides," and other kids, no, not so much. So I will tell you that when I think about how this happens, because I get asked to frame things in terms of the pandemic a lot. It's on the top of our minds. I'm of two minds here. And the way that my brain works, I will say it's sort of divided. I have this very literary side of my brain. I feel like when my kid used to say, like, my dinner side is full, but my dessert side is empty. I have these sides of my brain. And so they're a little bit at odds with each other. One loves science, and I'm not a scientist, but really interested in research and data. And I want things to be true, and then I have this more English majory literary side. So when I think about your question, how are these kids being impacted? Is 14 still 14? Is it changing the way kids are growing up and shifting developmental milestones? I think about it in terms of people are always people, and they've always been people and will always be people, and they will develop the same way, basically, always. That's my literary archetype, universal truth. We still read Shakespeare. We still are interested in stories that are the same, that tell us that people are always the same, right? So
we still fall in love, we still grieve, we still
we still, teenagers still want to be apart from their parents, even if it's in their bedroom and not across town. So part of me says not changing much. And then this more sciencey side of my brain says, but there is some data that even this early, that certainly for some kids, it's increasing kind of a trauma response and maybe affecting how they're learning things in school. Definitely is affecting how they're learning things academically. And we know that even though people are always people and they don't change, some things do kind of either derail an individual, like trauma does, or derail a group of people. I won't say derail, but change a group of people. Like puberty starts earlier now. Puberty is just earlier than it ever was. So is 14 different than it was a couple years ago? I don't know that we know yet. Optimistically, that literary side of me is like, no, everything is the same. The context within which kids are 14, of course, is different. They are not individuating and becoming independent at the mall and the roller rink and the hallways of school as much as we did. But they're still doing those things that they need to do, probably more in an online world and in an outdoor world, which is a real dichotomy right now. So I don't feel like we're totally off track for kids right now.
That actually feels a little bit hopeful to me.
I hope so. Yeah, I do believe it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so your 14 talks aren't about specific topics. For people who've read the book, they know this, but for folks who haven't, you don't have it broken down by, like, it's not, one talks about vaping, one talk is about sex, one talk is about social media. They're more, although each of those topics is certainly covered, you organized them more by principles almost, I would say. Talking about independence, talking about fairness, talking about reputations, talking about impulsivity. So how did you settle A, on that approach, and B, on those particular principles?
Right. So I tend to think of the concepts in the book just the way you've described them. Is there are these micro level things that we want to talk to kids about, like don't vape. That's real specific. And then macro things, like I hope that you not only don't vape, but that you become really good at taking care of yourself. And so to answer your question about sort of the process, as I said, I've been doing this for a really long time, and for about the past 6-ish years, about almost 10,000 parents and I have taken up this little tiny space on Facebook, this corner of Facebook, and it's a little private parenting group, and we talk about raising adolescents, and it gives me this incredible bird's eye view into what is causing the most difficulty in terms of communication between parents and teens. Where are they finding it the hardest to explain things to their kids? What's causing them the most angst or fear as a parent? So what I did is I just learned from that, and I wrote every micro idea down on a note card, and I rented an Airbnb, and I put the note cards all over the floor. And I think I've described this to you once before, that it was like I was solving a murder. Like if I'd had red string going from thing to thing, and I just stared at those cards until things started to come together into umbrella topics. So vape and hygiene and cutting and self-harm and suicide and nutrition, they all fall under taking care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So I just started to look at the micro, bring it out to the macro. What were the bigger ideas? And then from those large umbrellas, I picked the topics. And what I did when I was picking what 14 I would use is I didn't want them all to be a bummer. I didn't want a parent to open the book and be like, okay, sex, drugs, pornography. Because having good conversations isn't about giving a series of lectures. It's about connection. And we connect when we are happy and we're having fun, and we connect when times are hard and we're talking about things that are really heartfelt. So I wanted there to be a balance of that in the topics there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I love that you pointed that out, because I do think that sometimes it's hard to remember that this process can be, and maybe even should be, joyful, right? I mean, not every moment, of course, and maybe not even most moments, but that like there should be space for that.
That there should be, and the book is organized in that way to take you from what I think are the easiest and sort of most fun conversations up through the ones that might be a little more nuanced and more difficult. Mm-hmm. So early on, you're going to practice talking about creativity and having fun and relationships, your relationship with each other. And you get to the tougher stuff once you've kind of developed that habit and the strategy becomes more comfortable for you to use. And in the same way, the strategy itself is kind of built that way. Like I have this model in the book called the BRIEF model. Mm-hmm. And it's a 5-step process for how to talk to kids when they reach adolescence, because you really have to change the way you communicate. They don't want to talk or listen. So we have to invent a new way to talk, a new language. And it's hard to learn a new language. So I wanted that BRIEF model to begin the same way, really gently and easy, and to kind of help people tiptoe into the topics. And then it gets more robust.
Yeah. Tell us about BRIEF, because that's an acronym, right?
Yeah, so BRIEF is an acronym. And the way that I think about talking with kids at this age is that it is the job of language to tie groups of people together. And it is the job of teens to break ties apart. I mean, the process of becoming independent is really about breaking ties with your parents and figuring out who you are on your own. I mean, you still have a relationship. I don't want anyone to be discouraged by that thought, but we want our kids to live outside the house, presumably someday, and to make their own money and to have relationships. So the way that we always talked and communicated with them, that's one of the first things that gets sacrificed as they get older, is they think, I don't want to have communication right now. I'm trying to figure out myself and who I am and my relationship with my peers. So BRIEF is a new way of talking, and it coincides with their kind of reinvention of themselves. So it's not like you're introducing this new way of communicating and they're like, this is coming out of the blue. Everything's kind of changing for them at this stage. Do you want me to go into what each letter stands for? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So the B is begin peacefully. And that's like, it could literally be take a deep breath. Like we talked about at the beginning, you've got some time, so go slow. Another thing that works really well to begin peacefully is to schedule a time to talk. So kids don't like to be ambushed. And so if you can say like, hey, we haven't talked about grades in a while. Do you want to talk after dinner, or would you like to talk in the morning? And give them an opportunity to have some say in when this will go down. R is relate to your kid. And really that's because kids this age become a little bit suspicious. They're concerned that when you bring up a topic, you're bringing it up because you think something's wrong, or you want to see if something's going to be wrong, or you have this fear about it. Mm-hmm. So relating is just sounding like, hey, you're not in trouble. I just want you to know, like, I don't have any agenda here. I'm just curious, and I want to know what you know about this, or see what you're feeling about this. Mm-hmm. I is interview, and this is where I get to ask some questions. My recommendation here is to keep them global in nature. So you can get deeper as you develop this habit and you become good at this new way of talking together. But if you start with questions like, you're not vaping, are you? Are any of your friends vaping? Do you see people vape at school? Will you tell me if you know people who are vaping? They're not going to talk to you. Right. So keep it global. Be like, what do you know about vape? What do you know about what it does to your body? What do kids think adults are just totally out of their minds worrying about this? Like, tell me what you think. So that's interview. E is echo what you hear. Anybody who's been to a therapist or has seen one on TV knows what this sounds like. So this is like, oh, it sounds like you're saying it's not that big of a deal, or like, you understand what it does, or you have some questions about this. Is that right? So it's just checking for comprehension. And I will add that I think that's important for two reasons. One is there's often a vocab difference between adults and kids. And what you think something means, your kid thinks it means something else. Yep. So you want to do it for that reason. And you want to do it also just to show that you're a cool listener.
Yeah, you're listening.
Yeah, you're focused. You get it. And then F, B-R-I-E-F, F is feedback. And what I find is that, this is the moment where you can say, hey, thanks for talking with me about this. I'm really glad to hear where you are on it. My feelings are this. And then you can, depending on what you're talking about, you can give some general information, some educational points. You can give some insight, some wisdom. You can set some boundaries if you need to at this point. So that's your opportunity. But what I find is that parents are like, my kid's going to give me about 10 seconds before they pick up their phone or walk out the room or zone out. So I'm going to start with F. I'm just going to launch right into the
jump ahead.
Yeah, don't vape. Did you hear me? Don't vape.
Don't vape. Give me your feedback.
That's right. That's right. You don't want to start there. Your kid, that doesn't work. Right. We know that doesn't work. Okay. So you kind of have to re-earn the way into the convo at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a bag of tricks, right? At the beginning-ish of the book. I want to talk about some of them because they're great. So one of them is you tell parents, become an assistant manager. What do you mean by that?
Okay. So parents get nervous as their kids get older. And as I mentioned, as the world starts to expand right before them, and like there are strangers online and parties to go to and peer pressure and sex and all of this stuff. And so our tendency is to say, oh, well, now's the time to clamp down because now things are really getting dangerous. So
the stakes feel higher.
The stakes feel higher. And so we instinctively think, now I need to micromanage. And anyone who's been micromanaged knows that it doesn't produce your best results, right? So what I say to parents is think about the worst manager you ever had at a job, or the worst teacher you ever had, the worst person you ever worked for, and think about what characteristics they had that made them so difficult to work for. And parents will often say things like, oh, they were a bad communicator, or highly emotional, or took credit for my work, or if I screwed up, they embarrassed me or didn't let me try to fix it. All the things that we all have experienced.
Right.
And if you flip that list of characteristics, you have a great job description for being an assistant manager instead of a micromanager during these years. And that sounds a lot more like being a good listener, helping them to solve problems, but not rushing in to solve them, not having this is a tough one, a highly emotional reaction when you are upset or shocked or surprised by something. That takes a lot of training and practice too. But when you do that, when you can shift yourself into that role of assistant manager, you give your kid a lot of opportunity to practice how to fix things, and to practice how to solve problems, and how to feel and, communicate. And that's what they need. They need a lot of practice.
Okay. I love that. Yeah. Speaking of not being overly emotional, can we talk about another one of your bag of tricks, which is Botox brow? Tell us about Botox brow.
Okay, so this is probably my greatest hit. This is the one I talk about all the time. and I love it. And again, for 19 years, I've been doing this. And this is the one that parents will tell me all the time, like, this is the biggest game changer for them in their house. So teens, adolescents use a different part of the brain to read facial expressions than we adults do. So we know that there's a lot of brain restructuring that happens in adolescence. And adults use the prefrontal cortex to read facial expressions, and tweens and teens use the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. And that's because this part of the brain is really busy rewiring and building and getting good at the stuff that we want it to be good at, like critical thinking and problem solving and all of that. It creates some mix-ups over in communication, because when a kid sees a face with a really wrinkled brow like that, a lot of the times they assume anger. So if you've had an experience where you're talking to a kid and you ask a question that you think is pretty innocuous, like, hey, how'd the math test go? And your forehead is wrinkled, then they're going to be like, why are you mad? I don't even know. We haven't even gotten the grades yet. And they storm off, and you're left in the dust thinking, I don't know what happened. I just was asking a nice question. I thought I was being focused. So we make that wrinkled up brow for a lot of reasons.
Concern.
Concern.
Yeah.
Resting whatever face, right?
So
just how I look.
Resting bitch face. Yeah.
Thank you. It's just like how you look sometimes.
Yeah.
So what my advice is to just act like you are a celebrity on a late night talk show, and you've been so overly Botoxed you can't wrinkle your forehead. And when I say this to an auditorium of parents, I'll pull my glasses up. I will see so many parents going like this. And that looks crazy. I don't want you. You're not a deer in the headlights, but it's this neutral, like I have no emotion here. Kids love that.
I'm trying to do it.
You're doing it. This makes some parents a little bit uncomfortable. They're like, I should be able to be myself and have my own emotions.
Right.
Yes, but if it's causing a miscommunication, and you can have this neutral face when you're talking to your kid and they're like, oh, my parent isn't, or my teacher isn't mad, I can say anything right now. It's such a good way of keeping the door open. So that's one that I get a ton of feedback on, that parents are like, we're really talking now. Like they're not upset. They're not freaking out.
Yep. Yeah. And I think also by the time our kids get home to us, they've had a whole day, right, of wondering who's mad at them.
Yes.
From their best friend or their boyfriend or their teacher or their coach, or name the person who means something to them in their life. And they get home and they're kind of fatigued by reading people's expressions and emotions, and B, feeling like they've let someone down, right? Or made them mad. So I can see that as a reason to stay as neutral as you can as well.
I am so glad that you brought that up, because yes, I like to think of kids walking through the hallway of school or looking at the Zoom with everybody's face on it. And they are dealing with this middle school construction project that I mentioned earlier. So they have changing bodies, changing brains, changing sense of self and sense of identity. All of that is happening, and they have no way of knowing every day if what's happening in their personal construction project is normal, right? It is a huge fear of adolescence as they're going through all this change, whether or not they're doing it well, whether or not everything is happening according to the timeline. And they all they can do is look around at each other and say, I'll evaluate myself compared to these folks who are near me. And maybe I don't look like those kids do. Maybe I don't look as old as them, or maybe I look so much older and I feel funny about that. Or I'm not able to succeed in school the way I feel like they are. I don't know how everyone's keeping it together. I feel like I'm falling apart. Or they want to date and I still want to hang out with my parents. So you do that all day long. You're really facing the fear of, am I normal all day? And you come home and it's utterly exhausting. And so then again, like you said, to have that interaction with your parent where you don't know what they're thinking about you, it's so upsetting. And I can see why a kid would just be like,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. You also write about conversation crashers, which I also love. One of them I think is so powerful. You say, don't make assumptions about how your kid feels, has felt, or will feel. Talk about that.
So I think this is one of my Achilles heels. And a lot of the stuff that I write about it in the book, I really relate to it, having raised kids and worked with middle schoolers for so long now. This is one that I do, and then I'm still trying to correct. I don't want anybody to think that like, you just get this, you read the book and then.
Yeah, no, same.
Yeah, I'm still
probably
working.
Why I wrote it down.
Yeah. And so what this sounds like, this sort of presumption of how someone feels, I think we do it a lot as parents. Your kid's going to do something that you're not psyched about. Let's say your kid comes to you and they're like, I'm quitting soccer. I'm done. I don't want to be on the team anymore. And you're like, we're halfway through the season. You've always been a really great soccer player. It's a big part of your life. And so you might say something like, well, I think you're going to really regret it if you do that. So it's any sort of future forward view of like, I think you're going to feel upset if you do that. You're going to be full of regret. You might be angry later, whatever it is. Because when a kid is in the process of pulling apart and figuring out who they are, and they're really driven to do that, they're going to have a knee-jerk reaction to you predicting how they're going to feel later. And it's often this internal, like, you don't know me, you don't know how I'm going to feel, and therefore I'm going to dig my heels in on this one. Mm-hmm. A safer thing to do is just to ask them how they might feel, and coach them to be thinking about the future instead of just having an impulsive response. They might say, I'm going to feel great in 2 weeks. Soccer is too much for me. And you need to hear that. But they might also, if you ask them specific questions, like, let's talk about in 2 weeks, how are you going to spend your time? What are your teammates going to say? You know, that sort of, just ask. I think that's a good way to handle it instead.
I love that. Another conversation crasher is don't make yourself the center of the story. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I hear this a lot from parents who, and I relate to it, I understand it, but who I think are feeling hurt when their kid is hurt. They'll say things like, I told my child, oh, you know, it hurts me when you're hurting, that, you know, it hurts me that your friends did that to you. When you sort of make yourself the co-lead of the story, that's a very unnatural thing for a child to think, like, I don't want my experiences to be an emotional burden for my parent. And it becomes much harder to talk to your parent or an adult in your life when you feel like what you experience is difficult on them. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that it's hard. And that might just sound like saying, that sounds like it's really tough. Is there anything that I can do to make this easier for you? Would you like to talk about it? I can listen. Do you want to brainstorm some things that might help you feel better or cope with this? But to assume that you are sort of in there with them, I think it feels like an act of solidarity, right, but it's confusing to kids.
That's pretty eye-opening, I think, because I think a lot of us do that with the best intentions. I don't want them to feel alone in this. I'm going to let them know that I'm hurt by that too, that when they're wounded, I'm wounded. But I can see how that puts so much pressure on them and could even lead kids to feel like, I can't bring this to my mom. I can't bring this to my dad. Like, it's, you know, just adds to my sense of shame, or, you know, now I'm not only hurting as an individual, but now I've got the burden of, you know, knowing that I've caused my mom pain as well, or, you know, whatever trusted adult you went to. So I think that's so wise. It reminds me of another part of the book where you talk about if a kid is having a hard time making friends, or even finding maybe you know, getting a crush to return their affection, and a parent with the best intentions says something like, you know, I think you're a total catch, or like, you know, I just think you're the most fun. I just think you're the cutest. You know, I don't know what's wrong with those other kids. What, as well-intentioned as that is, what can that kind of send as a message to our kids?
Well, I mean, I think that most kids, in response to that, they have one of two reactions. It's either like puke, like, yeah. I don't want you to think I'm the best.
Right, you're 47, yes. So you being attracted to me is disgusting.
Yeah, right. It's like there's either that pukey response, right, or sort of like it's almost like infantilizing. Like, I mean, they're smarter than that. They know, and I think obviously you think that they hung the moon and the stars. Like, your kid probably knows that. If you're the type who's inclined to say this, right, then you've probably done a really good job of showing your kid that you adore them. Yeah. And so I think what people want, it's so interesting. I asked the parents in my parenting group recently, like, what if you could go back and do one thing different with how you raised your middle schooler, what would it be? And almost to a parent, what they said is, I would try to fix things less for them, and I would just listen. And it really is what people want. It's what I know. It's what I want when I've had a horrible day.
Totally.
Right. I just want my husband to be like, oh, sit down and like, tell me every terrible thing.
Right.
And I'll get you a glass of wine. Like, right. That's what I want. I don't want him to say, 100%. I can't believe you were late for that meeting. That sounds awful. Did you take Providence Road? Because I would never take that midday. I'd be like, oh.
Right.
Yeah. So they don't want us to fix it. Telling them they're gorgeous doesn't fix it. Right. It just listen, really just listen.
Okay. That's really good advice. So one of the things you write in the book is that 14 in some ways is the new 18. And I think this is kind of a good segue from what we were talking about just now. So does that mean that 14-year-olds are having or are ready for the sorts of intimate and possibly even sexual encounters or relationships that we're used to associating with an 18-year-old?
No, I do not want, I'm glad you asked because I really would like to clarify. No. So the thing about 14 that is really interesting, there's some research that shows that 14 is the most dangerous year of a boy's life. So this research looked at kids boys between 9 and 35 and found that they were taking the biggest number of risks at age 14. And I watched that happen with my kid and his buddies. And so I can say, anecdotally, like it certainly seemed true to me. Again, it's that kind of like freshman year, like things are getting big, you're feeling it, but you're the low man on the totem pole. And often you want to take risks to be impressive to the older kids or whatever it may be. It's an age for impulsivity and risk taking. I haven't seen a study that's been done on females in the same way, but we do know that girls enter puberty a little bit earlier. So perhaps it holds true. Not sure. But so when I say think of 14 as the new 18, I'm thinking about it more as think about having these conversations at an earlier age. Not so much that the kids are in the thick of it, that they're acting 18 or doing things that we perceive of as older activities, more that when your kid is 18, it's a bit late to begin talking about some of this stuff. So I really want you to start early and to hit it often and to have a ton of short conversations instead of like, okay, you are headed to wherever you're headed to next. Let me just, take
out on the drive to grab them at their dorm.
right.
Let's talk impulsivity.
Right, and consent, and all the other things in the
money.
Book. So it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a really broad range of stuff. So begin young.
Yeah, give yourself time.
Give yourself time and give them time because I don't learn things the first time I hear it. It takes me a while, right?
Right.
Good for both of you to keep hitting these topics again and again and get in and get out.
I like that. Okay, but at the same time, you do devote a chapter to talking to your kids about sexuality.
Yes.
And you acknowledge that, by 14, it's super healthy and normal and, developmentally appropriate for a kid to have a crush, for example, or, even feel like an attraction to another person. And that's shouldn't be off limits as a conversation. So how do we not just totally botch that conversation or inadvertently freight it with a whole bunch of shame?
Oh yeah, the shame thing. I have concerns about that. I don't want parents to do that. And it does feel a little bit like walking through a minefield because you're like, I got to say these very specific things. If I don't, it's kind of not worth having the conversation. And then I don't.
Right. You want to put up boundaries, right? Or
yeah, you do. Yeah. You really do actually want to be specific. And teens will say that they want their parents to be more specific. And parents are very euphemistic and weird about this. And just you have to get over that. So one of my favorite things to reflect on here is that like I said, they do want you to talk, and yeah, maybe they're going to be squirmy and a little bit funny about it, but you don't have to be just because they are. And you can acknowledge, you can say, I know this can feel a little bit funny to talk about, but I'm a safe person to talk to about this stuff. I'm not going to talk about it too long, keep it brief. But there are some things that I really need you to know. It's my job as a parent to make sure that you know these things. Mm-hmm. And I think, when you talk about how do you avoid kind of the pitfalls of shame, I would say by not making it personal. I would not talk about your child and what they have done specifically. If you found out that they've done something, I would keep it more, again, kind of global in nature. Like, this is healthy, this is not healthy. Here are some personal boundaries that I would suggest. Here are some things you can be doing. So you sort of think hard on your own values, and you do the research if you don't know. But the most pressing thing is that your child knows that you are a safe resource to talk to about sex and sexuality, two different things, and that you are really comfortable with any kind of conversation that might come up. And I would add too, Heidi, that you also need to be respectful of your kids' sort of own volume. Like some kids are not talkers in general, and some kids are not talkers about this subject in particular. And so if you have a kid who's not, you don't want to overdo the conversation and sort of force it on them in an uncomfortable way. So it may be like, I need to tell you a few things, then I'm going to leave some good material for you so you can access it when you're ready and you feel okay.
Yeah. So several questions in the Q&A are pointing to this, and it's making me think that this is a good time to bring it up. What if your kid is sort of like, by appearances, checking out, right? Like you're trying to talk to them and they're looking at their phone, maybe because they're uncomfortable and don't want to make eye contact, maybe because there's something super interesting happening on Snapchat and they've totally tuned you out. What do you do if you're trying to have, pretty important conversation with your kid about sexuality or about any of the 14 topics, and they're just barely in the room, even if they're physically in the room?
So two things. One is keep the scope of your conversation really narrow. You can have 100 conversations covering topics related to sex and sexuality, and they can be, I love that brief spells brief, right? I want them to be super short. So as you approach a new sort of micro topic within that, stick to that. So if you're like, I want to talk just about consent, then just do consent. And you don't have to get into pornography at that one. And you don't have to get into what's the right age to be having sex or holding hands or kissing or whatever it may be. So I would keep it brief and say, like, I have one point that I want to make, and I'm going to do it. And then we can come back to it later if you want. So that even if it is a 2-minute conversation, they're less likely to check out. The other thing is that, say they do start to check out on your one point. You could just say something like, hey, I know that this is feeling a little bit awkward. I get that. I'm not going to belabor this, but I just need to be sure that you have this information. So I would just point it out. Like, it looks like you're kind of zoning out, and that's okay. We're going to be done really quickly, but this is the feedback that I want to give you, assuming you've gone kind of BRIE or as far as you can with that.
Right. You've gotten through a few of the letters.
Yeah.
One viewer wants to know, can you still have these conversations after 14? Like, what if your kid's already, a couple years into high school?
Oh, well, I love this question. So that was one of the joys of writing the book, and some of the feedback that I got is I heard from a lot of people who said, this is working for me with my college kid or with my partner or with my coworkers. So the examples in the book are kind of middle school centric, but the strategies are ones that you'll use all the way through adolescence, and you can use with other adults in your life. They are strategies that work particularly well for sensitive listeners. And so that's often a middle schooler, but it's often other people we know too.
Okay. And you shouldn't feel like, oh, I missed my window. These needed to happen by 14. Now I blew it.
No, I'm so glad that you said that. No, start now. If you haven't started and your kid is 16 or 17 or 18, or they're, they have kids of their own, and you're like, hey, we never really talked about this, but I think we should. Yeah, you totally can do it at any phase. I think it's great to start earlier, but if you didn't, that doesn't mean don't start.
Yeah, I love that. Another viewer asks, is there any difference in communication depending on the gender? Do you need to sort of tailor how you approach or handle these conversations based on the gender of your kid, or if the kid possibly doesn't identify as one gender or the other?
Certainly different kids respond differently. It used to be that parents of boys would always say to me, like, I can't get my son to talk. I can't, he's not a conversationalist. And it feels like now, if that's an example, if I'm in an auditorium, I'll just as quickly get a mom say, no, that's my daughter. My son's a total chatterbox. So,
right.
If we were to paint with a really broad brush, we may be able to say, like, boys communicate a little bit differently than girls, but there's always another example in a different direction. So what I would say is, different kids have different volumes, as I said before. Some kids really want to engage, some kids don't. They're a little bit more private. So if you have a kid who's not really a talker and doesn't want to engage with you, there are a couple things you can do. One that worked really well for me and that a lot of parents tell me has helped them is take the conversation to text. Some kids, they need time to process and to respond. And they have that over a text, particularly if you say to them, here's something I want to talk about, or here's something I wanted to tell you just for you to know. You don't have to respond right now, but maybe in the next day or so, let me know what you think about this.
Yeah.
And give it to them and let them write to you that way back and forth. That's a really good way to get things started. Some kids do shared journals with their parents. Some kids just don't talk to their parents very much during these years. And so I say designate a proxy, find someone else who they can talk to in those years when they are really resistant to talking with you. And that could be a friend of yours or a family member, someone else, a sibling, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you can announce it. You can say, hey, I know you don't really like talking to me about this kind of stuff, but your Uncle Jim has said that he is happy to talk with you about it anytime.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it strikes me that you'd have to kind of check your ego a little bit, right? To do that.
You absolutely do. It can hurt to think, I wanted this relationship to be really strong. And now I feel like my kid doesn't particularly like me, doesn't have confidence in me, and doesn't trust me, and doesn't want to talk to me. So you have to swallow that and say, what's best for the team here is if I am cool about that for a couple years. And if you can do that, usually they come back around and they're like, usually they don't even notice. That they were distant from you for a while. They just sort of come back and it feels very natural to them.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that once about like holiday traditions. That gave me a lot of hope that like, yeah, there might be a few years where they're like, oh, not helping you decorate the tree, or like, I'm so over cookies. But then all of a sudden at like 20 or name the year, name the age, like they want to do it again. So I think that's really important to remember, that whatever's happening in this moment doesn't mean that that's now how it is forever. That's just how it is right now, right?
That's just how it is right now. And I say to parents, and it sounds like a joke, when they have an adolescent, the best thing they can do is get a hobby, because your kid is really working on figuring out who they are. And that's a terrific opportunity for you to do the same. So if you're hovering over them, like, are you ready to talk now? Are you ready to come make cookies with me now? They're going to push harder and harder.
Yeah.
But if you're like, it's so funny when your kid comes in and you're really eager to talk with them after school. If you jump on them, they don't want to talk to you. But if you say like, hey, I really want to hear how your day was, but I have to do a few things, maybe we can catch up later. They're like, well, I could just tell you right now real quick.
Right.
So
I read that described once as like the potted plant style of parenting. Like just make yourself a potted plant in the room, right? Like you're there, they see you, but you're not, right on top of them asking a million questions. I kind of liked that. All right, I'm seeing Lonnie appear in the corner. I'm
just a potted.
Lonnie's being a potted plant.
Well done.
I'm going to turn it over to Lonnie for questions, but I am going to say before we close, and we can talk lots more in after hours. I hope everybody will join us. But I love the way you end the book reminding readers that these conversations are not a test that you or your child needs to pass, that these are a practice, almost like yoga, like that this is an ongoing process, and you can have a day where you're good at it and have a day where you're less good at it, and you get lots of chances. And I just, that brings me a lot of comfort. And I think that that's a very important note to sort of include in the context of all of these conversations we're having.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
Great note, Heidi, and great conversation. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm not doing a very good version of a potted plant. Barreling in there.
No, you're good.
Heidi, great conversation. The two of you, lots of people very, very happy with this conversation, asking lots of questions. There were a lot of questions submitted ahead of time as well. So obviously, I mean, there's some, in my many years of doing parent programming, parent education programming, adolescence, looking at adolescence and the myriad topics that surround adolescence is always of high interest. So a couple things, folks. We are going to be doing after hours. Is going to start at 8:05. We're going to give both Michelle and Heidi a 5-minute break in between. Just so you know, after hours is like a Zoom meeting. Cameras are on, people are relaxed. You get to ask your own question. You get to raise your hand. You get to make comments, and it's interactive. It's a great way to follow up with both Michelle and Heidi on this conversation. I strongly encourage you to come and try it. I'm also, Michelle, I was really just so impressed. You have such a great style and manner. I imagine, as you know, FAN has dozens and dozens of school partners. I think we had 42 partners on this program. I'm not Michelle's agent, but what I'm just saying, I'm not, but what I would just say is that I think that I'm sure that a lot of schools would really benefit from you working with them, maybe working with parent education groups, doing book discussion groups. So I think Anne-Marie, who's our producer, Anne-Marie, if you would put in maybe a link again so that people know how to find Michelle, especially because I know there's so many school principals, all sorts of people are on this Zoom. So I just want to make it easier for you to find a Michelle later. So with no further ado, I want to get to a couple questions. Join us in after hours. We're going to start it open at 8:05. As soon as Heidi and Michelle come in, then we'll open up the room. So here's a question Katie was asking in tonight. She was saying, how do you feel about incorporating a podcast, a book, movie, or documentary into the mix about one of these topics to open up the conversation with your child?
I love that. In fact, I wrote an article for CNN about that. So you might be able to Google it, but I think using pop culture in order to sort of break the ice with your kid is such a good way to do it. Kids don't like to feel like you're talking about them. Kids this age, they've had the spotlight on them all day. They don't want to feel like you are sort of shining it on them again. So I love this idea of using some kind of media as a way to talk. And you'll find so many examples in that article and just out there that if you're like, oh, well, I want to talk about consent, or well, I want to talk about technology, or I want to talk about creativity, it's all there.
Excellent. One of the questions submitted ahead of time, and I saw this gentleman is on the Zoom, I checked. So Stephen was asking, sleep, how do I get my teenager to sleep? Any tricks, tips, even one, my guess is, any apple from the tree they would appreciate, I'm sure.
Sure. This is such a battle that every parent deals with just about. You can't make a kid sleep. What you can do is sort of prime the environment, and everybody says the same thing. I will quickly reiterate it. You want the room to be cold. A weighted blanket can help. You want to get rid of technology like an hour before. Interestingly, the light from a TV across the room does not keep you awake the way a light that is up close to your face does. It doesn't alter with your sleep as much. I'm not saying put a TV in your kid's room, but you can sort of not worry about that as much as an iPad or a phone or something like that. And then I think you can sort of negotiate with your kid when they're older, and you can say, yeah, we can look at an increased bedtime. And if we do that, then we need to talk about whether that works or not. How do we evaluate whether that works? And let's decide on those evaluations ahead of time. Are you grumpy the next day? Are you still able to do your schoolwork? Can you move your body? All those things. So that's the best I can suggest there. This is a tough one.
It is a tough one. Maura also asked, how do we approach our child if they might be hanging out with someone who isn't, at least in the parent's opinion, isn't a great influence?
Yeah, this one comes up all the time. What I would say is that we often don't know. I mean, if for sure you know, gosh, when my kid goes to that kid's house, they do drugs, then no, your kid can't go to that kid's house. But if you're like, I just have a weird feeling that this kid is kind of sneaky, I would say be very cautious here, because if you say that, if you're like, I don't know, look, I don't know the kid, but it feels like maybe they're a little bit sneaky, it's very likely that your kid will become defensive of that other person, or more attracted to that other person, or dig their heels in, or whatever it may be. So I think you just ask questions about how that other person makes them feel and what they like about spending time with that other person. I would maybe start with investigating some of the draw and the positives. And then you kind of have to wait and see what's actually happening, but I wouldn't make a determination on a funny hunch.
Got it. Kate is asking, can you ask your child to echo back to you, or is that just too much for them?
I think it depends on your kid. If you try it and your kid's like, I don't want to, why are you making me? That's dumb. Then you know that probably that won't work with your kid. But you could say, so if the reason you want them to echo back is specific, you want to know, do they understand this the same way you understand it? Then what I would say is not echo this back to me, but like tell me so I understand you. What does dating mean to you, or what does this mean to you? So I would think about, why do I want them to echo back, and then ask that specifically instead of just saying echo me.
Robin is asking, I'm sure probably other people want this answer, how can I join Michelle's parenting group?
Oh, that's nice. Just go on Facebook.
Problem with telling people about your private parenting group where you're talking to them all.
It's open for everyone to join. You just have to have kids. That's the thing. So go to Facebook and look up Less Stressed Middle School Parents and ask to join, but make sure you answer the questions, because a lot of people just say request and then they don't answer, and then I don't let them in because I don't want trolls in our group.
So it's private, but it's not VIP admission. Just
no. It's free and open to anyone who is a parent of an adolescent or a pre-adolescent. So if you have a kid who's 8 and you're like, I want to be there just to know ahead of time, fine, just say yes, I have a tween, and or answer in the blank how old your kid is.
Okay, we're at 7:58. Heidi, do you have any circle wraparounds? Anything that you want to end with?
I'm just noticing a few people in the Q&A say they're not sure how to attend after hours and they want to. So do you want to take a second to?
No, I think maybe it's possible people have not been in, if they don't have their chat window open, then maybe they have not seen it placed in chat. So let me do this. You can go to, Anne-Marie, you just put it again, didn't you? I think I just saw her put it in. So if you don't have your chat window open, if you could open it, the way that you get into after hours is that you buy a copy of Michelle's book, but you have to buy it from our bookseller, our partner bookseller, which is The Book Stall. If you go to www.thebookstall.com, and they have an online calendar, you can see if you click on the fan event, up comes the book purchase page. If you buy a copy of the book, the bookstall will send you in an email the link to register for after hours. So that's how you get access to after hours, is by buying a copy of Michelle's book and then coming and hanging out with us. So if you didn't have chat open, Anne-Marie, for those, sorry for those of you who've had chat open the whole time, she'll put it in one more time. Sometimes if you don't have chat open and something goes in there, then you can't see it. So she'll put it in one more time just to make sure everybody has it. There's a hot link in there. So thank you, Heidi, for pointing that out to me.
Sure.
Anything else that you want to say?
No, just thank you so much, Michelle, for your time and wisdom, and Lonnie for hosting this. It was just wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much, Michelle. We love you. We're new big fans of you. So thank you so much for your time.